half of the world depends on it. Rice.
It is a staple, it is important, it is needed every day by millions of people.
Kalau beras tidak ada, ini bisa berdampak sosial politiknya gonjang-ganjing. Oleh karena ini ketahanan pangan daripada berasnya harus kita penuhi dulu.
Nearly all of the world's rice is produced and consumed in Asia. But as climate change looms and the demand explodes, is there a danger of relying too much on rice?
We lose about 4 million metric tons alone due to flood. That means 4 million metric tons were able to feed 30 million people.
When you are losing 500,000 farmers every year, so probably what, 30, 40 years down the road, I don't know whether the food sovereignty is there.
It's the last day of the harvesting season in India. A busy day for farmer Vinod Kumar Mishra. He has been a farmer for 3 decades on this 4-acre plot in Tikrajure village in Uttar Pradesh. It is India's second largest rice-growing state.
जून जुलाई में जब नर्सरी डाली गई तो उस टाइम मौसम बहुत गर्म था। किसी तरीके से किसानों ने नर्सरी को उगाया। उसके बाद बरसात की आशा में बरसात नहीं हुई तो लोगों ने ट्यूबवेल से पानी भर के लगाना शुरू किया, धान रोपाई करना शुरू किया और अंत तक पानी गिरा ही नहीं।
Rice is a labor-intensive crop that requires meticulous management by farmers, preparing the field, sowing the seed, irrigating, fertilizing, and harvesting. It also has specific water requirements throughout its growth cycle. To Vinod's dismay, the weather turned against him when harvesting was about to begin in September.
बाद में या भी लास्ट में जब धान प्रौढ़ अवस्था में था अपनी, तब जाकर के ज़्यादा पानी गिरा। जब बाली निकल रही थी उस टाइम 18-18, 20-20 घंटे पानी गिर गया। उससे इतना नुकसान हुआ कि किसान बेहाल हो गया और धान गिर गया सब। धान में जो फूल आ रहा था सब झड़ गया। इससे धान में इतना नुकसान हुआ है कि किसानों को क्या बताएं। किसान वही है कि 10% से लेकर के और 50, 60, 70% तक नुकसान लोगों का हो गया। मेरा भी खुद ही हुआ, कुछ खेतों में 50% हुआ नुकसान, कुछ में 20% हुआ। टोटल मिलाकर के 50% के एवं में जो है हमारा लोगों का नुकसान हो गया है। अब जैसे बीघे में, एकड़ में जैसे 22-24 हज़ार, 25 हज़ार का धान बेच लेते थे लोग, तो अब 50% नुकसान हुआ तो 12-13 हज़ार रुपये का निकला और लागत वही है, ज़्यादा लागत हुई और फ़ायदा कम हुआ।
Agriculture employs about 4 out of 10 people in India. As last year's poor weather halved Vinod's harvest, he's worried about the next planting cycle.
तो वही कटौती चलती है, जैसे अब शिक्षा है, पढ़ाई है, लड़कों बच्चों की है। अब वो तो उसमें तो कटौती नहीं हो सकती है। अब गैस में कटौती हम लोग करते हैं, थोड़ा कम यूज करते हैं, या अन्य खर्चों में कपड़ों में व्यवस्था जैसे है उसको भी कम यूज करते हैं, बनाते हैं, नए कम बनवाते हैं। तो ये जो कटौती करने वाली चीज़ें उनमें कटौती किए जाती है, और तो जो नहीं कटौती हो पाती उसके लिए क्या किया जाएगा।
For nearly 4 billion people around the world, rice is their main source of food. Rice is so important that it is integral to political stability. In Indonesia, the price of rice tripled at the height of the Asian financial crisis in 1998. Food riots ensued. The economic and political upheaval eventually brought down President Suharto.
Begitu negara tidak memiliki ketahanan pangan, otomatis dampaknya apa? Yang pertama, harga bisa naik. Begitu harga bisa naik, kemampuan masyarakat membeli juga menjadi kurang. Nah, disinilah akan menjadi gonjang-ganjing. Oleh karena itu, sekali lagi ketahanan pangan menjadi fundamental yang utama. Menjadi sangat-sangat penting untuk menjaga tadi, mengeliminir segala macam persoalan-persoalan sosial ke depannya.
So people aren't going to change, or stop consuming rice if it goes down, because it is part of their culture. That's what they grew up with, right? Most of Asia. And interestingly, it is growing rapidly. If we don't keep up with the production to meet that demand, keep up with the supply to meet the demand, then that is going to lead to an increase in prices. And that is going to bring about food insecurity, hunger.
Now, rice production is facing challenges from many fronts. What is happening in India is happening elsewhere. Growing demand in the face of limited supplies. It is estimated that for every 1 billion people added to the world's population, an additional 100 million tons of rice needs to be produced every year. The global population reached 8 billion in 2022 and is projected to cross 9 billion in another 15 years. But rice production is not expected to keep up. The United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA, projects global rice output to slip more than 2% in the marketing year ending July 2023. It's the lowest production in 3 years. In India, output could drop about 4% to 125 million tons.
This year, in the rainy season, during the planting time, several Indian states, which are major producers of rice, actually experience deficit rainfall. So they reduce the area of rice that they planted. So that is expected to result in lower production of rice this year. In addition to that, we have climate change, completely erratic weather patterns. Increasing shocks and stresses, storms and cyclones and floods. Some places which actually experience deficit rainfall during the planting season actually had untimely excess rainfall when the crop was ready for harvesting. So that was losses. So these are expected to lead to a shortfall in food.
Push to grow more rice is running up against a major hurdle, the lack of water. In the 1960s, India embarked on a green revolution, introducing high-yield rice and wheat varieties to address food shortages. West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, and Punjab became important rice-growing areas. But rice is a notoriously thirsty crop, using around 2,300 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram of rice. When the rains did not come, Indian farmers started pumping groundwater to irrigate their paddy fields.
About 2/3 of the states in India are actually facing groundwater depletion. And it is serious. And it's not something that happened overnight. I think it has happened over time, over several years. And it is because of increasing use of groundwater for irrigation. 90% of the groundwater use in India today is for irrigation. Very intensifying systems in some parts, but also that coupled with a number of policies like cheap electricity, huge subsidies for irrigation pumps. So all that has sort of, incentivized the farmers to actually extract more and more groundwater.
In this country, we need to do whatever we can do to save water, to conserve water. And the cropping pattern that we have today is just completely the opposite. And you see that there is water distress, there is farmers' distress, and there is farmer suicide. Therefore, as a result in Vidarbha, because it's just not sustainable.
While high-yield rice led to a dramatic increase in output, there are now questions over its sustainability.
So the green revolution paradigm that is very production-centric has been carried forward until today. It started in the 1960s, and it has saved countries like India and Indonesia from rice shortages, from starvation during periods of wars, political instabilities, and droughts. But then this paradigm is no longer sustainable and is already outdated because Green Revolution paradigm introduced intensive agriculture practices and used a lot of inputs from high-yielding seeds, water, pesticides, fertilizers. And this has created crisis on our environment and in our ecosystem.
What the Green Revolution succeeded at is boosting India's rice output, turning it into the world's largest exporter. The South Asian country accounts for about 40% of global rice shipments. So, supply shocks in India will reverberate around the world. With output falling in 2022, the government issued a temporary rice export ban in September, prompting an immediate jump in Asian rice prices.
People are becoming more protectionist. They will give much higher priority to their own national food security than allow trade, and international trade has declined, and that's the big issue.
Exports curbs from India have provided an opportunity for rivals like Thailand to fill the gap. But the world's second largest rice exporter is also facing its own challenges.
In 2019 and 2020, Thailand lost almost $1 billion because of climate change due to flood.
Supapon Tong Ain is a village head in the rice-growing province of Prachinburi, about 2 hours east of the Thai capital, Bangkok. The 50-year-old mother of 3 owns around 4 acres of rice fields in her village, Baan Paidung. With the harvest about to start in the 5 months, she's making sure the paddies have enough irrigation.
นี่เป็นทางขึ้นน้ำนะคะที่เราจะเอาน้ำจากแม่น้ำนะคะเข้าสู่แปลงนานะคะก็เราก็จะได้น้ำจากแปลงจากแหล่งน้ำธรรมชาตินะคะคือคลองแล้วก็วิทย์ขึ้นมานะคะเลยผ่านทางขึ้นน้ำนะคะแล้วก็เข้าแปลงนานะคะ
Like the other farmers in the village, she uses genetically modified rice seeds. Rice seeds have been genetically modified more than 2 decades ago to produce varieties which are more disease and drought resistant while increasing yields.
ทำไมเราถึงทำข้าว120 วันนะคะเนื่องจากว่าข้าว120 วันเนี่ยจะเป็นข้าวที่ทนต่อโรคและแมลงนะคะแล้วก็อากาศที่เปลี่ยนแปลงนะคะก็ปัญหาก็จะน้อยกว่าข้าวที่อายุสั้นข้าวอายุสั้นก็จะเป็นข้าว90 วันนะคะที่เราทำก็คือเป็นข้าวที่เรียกว่าไวต่อแสงนะคะแล้วก็ปัญหาที่พบของข้าวอายุสั้นนะคะก็คือจะเกิดโรคและแมลงได้ง่ายกว่าข้าวที่อายุ120 วันนะคะ
Research into rice has created strains that are resistant to climate change-related impacts like heat and water shortage. But here, rice farmers are facing a different problem. 4 years ago, Supapon found out that the fields in her village were contaminated with salt water.
ช่วงที่น้ำเค็มมาเราก็บังเอิญเราไม่ได้ปิดท่อนะคะน้ำเค็มที่มาก็จะไหลเข้าแปลงนานะคะก็ทำให้แปลงนาบริเวณเนี้ยก็จะเป็นน้ำเค็มเสร็จเราก็พอแล้วเราก็ต้องรีบเปิดน้ำเค็มออกนะคะแล้วก็ปิดท่อไว้นะคะไม่ให้น้ำเค็มเข้าอีกแล้วก็ส่วนผลผลิตที่ได้หลังจากปี62ที่น้ำเค็มเข้าไปในพื้นที่นะคะแต่เข้าไม่เยอะนะคะเราก็ใช้ข้าวที่ออกมานะคะก็จะเป็นลักษณะที่เป็นรีบนะคะเป็นรีบเม็ดจะออกเป็นเขาเรียกว่าเม็ดลายนะคะทำให้ผลผลิตของเราคือไม่ดีนะคะ
The rice fields in Supapon's village get water from Bang Pang Kong River that flows into the Gulf of Thailand. As sea levels rise and cause coastal flooding, salt water is seeping further inland, contaminating arable land. Apart from Thailand, saltwater intrusion has affected many rice-growing countries in Southeast Asia, from Cambodia to the Philippines to Vietnam.
More and more countries are affected by salinity in soil. Vietnam itself, over the last couple of years, have lost about 500,000 hectares due to salinity in lower Delta Mekong. And moving forward in the next couple of years, they are targeted to lose almost 2 million hectares of soil due to salinity. And because of Thailand's land position, we're going to see more and more agricultural land being eroded due to salinity.
Around the world, more than 800 million hectares of land are already affected by salt, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization. It represents around 9% of the world's surface, or roughly 4 times the size of India. Excess salinity caused by saltwater intrusion and flooding can make water undrinkable, damage soil, and hinder crop growth.
Every year, throughout APEC, we lose about 4 million metric tons alone due to flood. That means 4 million metric tons were able to feed 30 million people. Can you imagine the scale with more dramatic climate change affecting us? In 2019 and 2020, Thailand lost almost $1 billion because of climate change due to flood. So that will translate to a loss of income to both Thailand's smallholder farmers, also potentially have increased the cost of rice to all stakeholders in Thailand.
Thailand and Vietnam combined make up a quarter of global rice exports. As the problem persists, farmers must find ways to manage or minimize saltwater intrusion.
เราก็ช่วงนั้นเรายังไม่มีน้ำจืดนะคะเราก็ต้องรอฝนนะคะรอน้ำฝนหรือถ้าน้ำจืดมาเราก็เอาน้ำจืดเอาวิทย์ใส่เพื่อเป็นการแก้ดินนะคะเป็นเรียกว่าการแก้ดินคือเอาน้ำใส่ที่ดินแล้วก็เพื่อให้ดินคายน้ำเค็มออกมาแล้วเราก็เปิดทิ้งนะคะก็คือการแก้ปัญหา
To combat this, the government has released water from Nehru Bodindra Chinta Reservoir to push the salty water back into the Gulf of Thailand.
คือจริงๆแล้วเนี่ยรัฐบาลก็พยายามผลักดันนะคะในเมื่อพอน้ำทะเลไหลเข้ามาเนี่ยทางรัฐบาลเนี่ยเราก็จะมีการสร้างเขื่อนในการหรือการเปิดปิดประตูน้ำอันนี้ถ้าเกิดน้ำทะเลหนุนมากๆเนี่ยเราก็จะมีการผลักดันใช้แม่น้ำเนี่ยผลักดันน้ำทะเลออกไปแต่อาจจะมีที่บางส่วนที่เล็ดลอดก็คือว่าก็ต้องเป็นส่วนน้อยพอเริ่มเป็นส่วนน้อยเนี่ยชาวนาส่วนมากก็จะยอมรับในสิ่งนั้นอยู่แล้ว
More than half of Thailand's 13 million farmers grow rice. It is the country's most important crop, the main staple, and the biggest agricultural export.
คือจริงๆไม่ว่าอาหารอะไรก็แล้วแต่นะคะการบริโภคในประเทศเนี่ยเป็นสิ่งที่สำคัญในการส่งออกก็หมายความว่าประเทศไทยต้องบริโภคพอเพียงแล้วนะคะแล้วก็ส่งออกแต่ถ้าเกิดว่าภาวะทุกอย่างในโลกนี้ถ้ามันเกิดภาวะในโลกร้อนทั่วไปเหมือนกันทั่วโลกก็คิดว่าคงจะไม่แค่ลดแค่ประเทศไทย
Thailand produces more rice than it consumes, with a portion of the surplus exported or added to the nation's stockpile. But consumption is climbing. Between 2019 and 2023, Thailand's domestic rice consumption has gone up more than 10% to 13 million tons. But output is forecast to rise less than 1% to around 20 million tons in 2023. To keep export numbers stable and to meet domestic demand, Thailand is drawing on its rice stockpile. Inventory at the end of 2022 fell by 1 million tons compared to 2021.
A significant proportion of our Thai farmers rely on rice that they produce for their family use. So with that, can you imagine I'm not having sufficient food for my family and then be able to sell the excess produce for income generation. So, cascade down to insufficient income, insufficient nutrient for the smallholder farmers and its family. And then what about the nation in terms of its importance as a key exporter, a national income generation?
Events elsewhere has also increased the demand for rice. Russia and Ukraine are major producers of wheat, corn and barley. But the war has disrupted exports of these key grains, triggering global shortages and rising food prices. This has been made worse by some nations imposing their own export bans. As consumers looked for alternatives, strong demand for Thai rice drove export prices to their highest in nearly 2 years, at around $500 a ton. Unfortunately for ordinary Thais like Peng Kamna, this has dragged domestic prices up as well.
เพราะว่ามันแพงขึ้นที่ต่างจังหวัดเรามันแค่โลละ10-15 บาทอะไรอย่างนี้นะพอมาถึงกรุงเทพมีครึ่งต่อครึ่งเลย40 บาทแล้วเดี๋ยวนี้ข้าวก็ไม่มีนะ5 บาท10 บาทขึ้นไปไม่มี5 บาทนะ5 บาทก็นิดเดียวข้าวเหนียวแต่ก่อนโควิดนี่มันคือประมาณ30-35ใช่ไหมแต่เดี๋ยวนี้มันขึ้นไป40-45มันก็ขึ้นไปอีกเท่าไหร่อะบางเจ้าบางที่นี่เขาก็40บางที่ก็50กิโลหนึ่งอะข้าวหอมมะลิ
The 59-year-old moved to Bangkok from Nakhon Phanom in northern Thailand to find work cleaning apartments. Her meager income of 373 baht or $11 means she must be frugal, even for food.
300นี่ใช่ไหมแล้วกินซะ100แล้วค่ารถต่างหากนะแล้วก็เป็น140แล้วใช่ไหมล่ะแล้ววันนี้เราอยากกินชากาแฟอะไรนี่แก้วนึงก็25 บาทอย่างนี้ก็ไปละ100-200ไป200ซะแล้วที่เหลือมันก็อยู่ประมาณ100 กว่าบาทใช่ไหมล่ะที่เหลือมันก็อยู่แค่นั้นแหละแล้วก็กินวันหนึ่ง3 คาบ 3 มื้ออะไรอย่างนี้แล้วก็กินน้อยๆลง
The war in Ukraine has had a profound impact on farmers in another way. It has created a supply crunch in a crucial agricultural input, fertilizers.
Sebetulnya kurang perhatian. Sebetulnya Menteri Pertanian Teng Liling lah.
What will this do to rice prices? Sunday morning in Karawang, Indonesia. Is just like any other day for Charpan. The 70-year-old rice farmer is preparing fertilizer for his crop on 2.5 acres of land. Like other farmers in Karawang, Charpan uses a high-yield rice variety that allows 3 harvests a year. The variety is also resistant to fungal disease and pests. But the father of 4 children is racing against time to meet the harvest at the end of March.
Soalnya pupuk telat gini, jadi sebetulnya mah udah 15 hari udah dipupuk. Cuman pupuk susah. Sampai umur 1 bulan ini. Sebetulnya kurang anak ini padi. Jadi susah pisan nunggu pupuk. Kan lagi krisis ini. Krisis siapa? Ya kekurangan pupuk lah. Telatnya mah kurang pupuk.
Originally from Indramayu in central Java, Charpan has been growing rice in Karawang for 26 years. His 3 harvests usually yield about 15 tons of unhusked rice a year. Each harvest can earn him around 17.5 million rupiah or around $1,100. but about half of that will be used to cover expenses, such as buying seeds and fertilizers, renting a tractor, and buying petrol for his water pump to irrigate the field. This year's first harvest might see a 10% drop in yield due to the fertilizer shortage.
Jadi gimananya? Dari pertama ini kekurangan pupuk nggak ada. Ya termasuk telat pupuk. Baru tahun sekarang. Biasanya enggak.
The reason why Charpan is unable to buy fertilizer lies almost 10,000 kilometers away. The war in Ukraine has created a global fertilizer crisis. Russia is a major producer of potash, a key fertilizer ingredient. Russia and Ukraine export about 28% of the world's nitrogen and phosphorus-based fertilizers.
Fertilizer has been one of the main agriculture concerns everywhere, so not just in Indonesia. So with the ongoing global uncertainty, so there's a war in Ukraine, and as a result, restrictions on fertilizer trade, high energy prices, and then the Chinese export quota and export ban on phosphate. As a result, supplies have been tight, and fertilizer prices have seen a record high in April 2022.
The fertilizer shortage is expected to continue into 2023, and farmers bear the brunt of the scarcity. Indonesia subsidizes fertilizer, but supply is limited, especially after the government shifted funding to other areas.
Now, going back at home last year, we see the Ministry of Agriculture cutting its subsidies on fertilizer. So last year's allocation of fertilizer was much lower than the usual. And of course, farmers were not happy about it because fertilizer is an important element. It's directly responsible for production cost and eventually prices, crop prices, food prices.
Meanwhile, the price of commercially produced fertilizer has almost doubled in the past year.
Ya gimana ya udah nggak ada lagi pasti saya beli itu. Beli pupuk hormesil yang ya itunya nggak ada. Ya kan hari tanaman mah kudu perlu dipupuk. Kalau nggak dipupuk ya saya rugi. Nggak bisa hasil. Ya kepaksa saya. Mau mahal nggak?
The problem is so severe that at the G20 summit in Bali in November 2022, President Joko Widodo called on members to take action.
Masalah pupuk jangan disepelekan. Jika kita tidak segera mengambil langkah agar ketersediaan pupuk mencukupi dan harga yang terjangkau, maka 2023 akan menjadi tahun yang lebih suram.
So understandably, the president was concerned about this situation going well into 2023 and affecting production costs and outputs in Indonesia as well. And I believe that he was trying to appeal to the G20 leaders in that forum, you know, to find a solutions to the global fertilizer situation.
Just like India, the Green Revolution has boosted Indonesia's rice output to catch up with the country's growing population. Rice is the main staple for the country's 273 million people, the world's fourth largest producer and consumer of rice. Without fertilizers to boost output, the country will have difficulty meeting domestic demand, a roadblock in Indonesia's push for self-sustainability.
Kalau kita melihat, kita kan kalau bicara pupuk juga banyak kita masih impor. Artinya Bapak Presiden mengingatkan kepada seluruh aparatnya, mengingat perang Rusia dan Ukraina ini masih berlangsung, kemudian sumber pupuk juga berasal dari kedua negara tersebut. Nah, ini harus menjadi kewaspadaan kita. Nah, kemudian di mana pupuk ini juga sangat fundamental kan dalam rangka meningkatkan produktivitas pertanian. Secara prinsip ini dulu kita pegang bahwa makanan pokok bangsa kita adalah beras. Itu kita pegang dulu. Artinya kita harus berusaha memenuhi kebutuhan mereka dulu. Kebutuhan sebagaimana yang saya bilang tadi untuk menjamin atau mendukung ketahanan pangan.
Soalnya di distribusi, ini yang sedang kita cermati, distribusi ini. Di mana terjadi simbol-simbol. Karena memang besok lusa juga saya akan ketemu dengan petani, komplainnya pasti pupuk. Tanam harus tetap jalan. Kalau tidak ditanam kan menjadi persoalan buat sawah-sawah yang lain kan gitu kan. Ya, artinya tetap itu diupayakan tanam dengan berbagai cara. Mungkin saja dia akan menggunakan pupuk yang tidak subsidi. Mungkin saja itu bisa terjadi di lapangan.
On the ground, farmers like Chapan must continue planting with or without subsidized fertilizers.
Ya sebetulnya mah ya enggak lah, kalau nanam mah kudu penuh. Tapi kan pendapatan beda ntar. Kalau pupuknya kurang mah beda pendapatan. Sebetulnya kurang perhatian. Sebetulnya Menteri Pertanian teh ngeliling lah, ngontrol nih petani teh. Gimana kengeluhannya petani, gimana susahnya, kan gitu.
Tapi pada satu hal, titik, kita akan berusaha menggunakan pupuk-pupuk organik. Menghindari ketergantungan itulah itu menjadi penting. Maka ini pertanian persawahan ini harus terintegrasi ke peternakan. Karena jerami bisa jadi pakan ternak. Pakan sapi, gitu kan. Nah, ini yang sedang kami lakukan hari-hari ke depan, dan saya intens berkomunikasi dengan teman-teman peternak, dengan lembaga-lembaga peternak, asosiasi peternak. Nah, itu akan kita supaya masyarakat memelihara sapi. Nanti kotoran sapi itu dikonversi ke sawah melalui proses tertentu ya. Jerami difermentasi, kotoran sapi difermentasi, gitu kan.
But Indonesia has come a long way since food riots in 1998 forced President Suharto to step down.
Berhenti dari jabatan saya sebagai Presiden Republik Indonesia.
Annual rice demand of around 35 million tons is mostly met by local output. Indonesia is considered self-sufficient in rice.
Generally speaking, we will not suddenly run out of rice because we produce almost 100% of all rice that we consume. Almost all of that comes from domestic production. So even if there's external factor that affects rice supplies in the region or even in the world, we're still virtually self-sufficient, and I don't think we will suddenly run out of rice.
But with the population growing, boosting rice output remains one of the government's top priorities. In 2020, Indonesia launched a program to grow rice, corn, and other crops to reduce reliance on food imports. The new food estate project covers an area of 770,000 hectares, more than 10 times the size of Singapore, in Kalimantan, Sumatra, and Papua. But Indonesia has attempted this before. More than 2 decades earlier, a project to turn more than 1.4 million hectares in Kalimantan into rice plantations ended in failure. The reason? The nutrient-poor peatlands were ill-suited to grow rice. So, fertilizer scarcity, inefficiencies, and climate change will be big hurdles in Indonesia's plan to increase rice yields.
Theoretically speaking, that will of course affect the outputs, but then again, it's without a thorough study, we cannot say how much that affects the actual yield, because there are other factors. There are pest situation, pest attacks, unpredictable weather, we cannot just pinpoint one thing as being responsible for every fluctuation in yield and output.
I think in my view, on average, Indonesian farmer is not still ready to face climate change. There's still a need to invest more in more affordable, more accessible, climate resilient technologies such as low carbon rice cultivation. There's a need for better infrastructure to inform farmers about climate. So the meteorology, climatologies, and geophysical body BMKG in Indonesia could perhaps improve the way they share information to farmers.
With both short and long-term pressures on the rice supplies, should countries start looking for other food options?
Orang bisa makan ubi kayu yang kalau memang dia sudah memang basicnya ubi kayu, jangan dipaksa dia makan beras.
Climate change has made rice yields more unpredictable. Rising sea levels have salted rice paddies across Asia. Recently, the war in Ukraine has triggered a shortage in fertiliser and sent global food prices to record highs.
In many of the cases, you see the food crisis, the crop failure, or things like that, were caused by climate change. That's why to address climate change is the fundamental way to deal with the food security or food insecurity problems. But of course, there are some other issues, military conflicts, or bad management, right? And I think this time we all understood how important it is to ensure the food security.
You're going to have a multiple countries facing the same issue of reduction in yield, and therefore will impact in terms of global reduction in affordability of our rice to the market.
With the global food crisis expected to extend into 2023, many countries, including China, are looking to shore up their own supplies.
In the case of China, China has a quote-unquote shameful history of famine between 1959 and 1961. So leaders in China know very well not to repeat the history. So food security has always been the national priority agenda. Of course, China food policy strategies is be able to produce and hold food at home as much as possible. And China has been importing a lot of food and keep stock in the country. There's one study basically that estimates China to hold half of the global grain stock. And another thing that China has been doing is investing in technology, in agri-tech and biotech. And one of them is the new invention in the perennial rice variety.
The race is now on to develop genetically modified rice which can tolerate salt water and drought.
There is a lot of effort that's going on to develop varieties that are tolerant to droughts and submergence and heat and cold and salinity and so there is a lot that is going on. There's constant development of new varieties. We are developing short duration varieties. So the crop is out in the field for a shorter amount of time. So you are reducing that risk of exposure to some of these shocks and stresses. You are also reducing the labor input that goes into production of that, cultivation of that crop.
As weather patterns become unpredictable, managing water supplies is now crucial. Flooding causes farmers in Bangladesh and India to lose up to 4 million tons of rice a year, enough to feed 30 million people.
There is a lot of other technologies, that are being developed, be it, some of these water management technologies, etc.
ตอนนี้รัฐบาลก็พยายามที่จะให้เทคโนโลยีต่างๆในการให้น้ำ นะคะคือการให้น้ำข้าวเนี่ยก็จะใช้ในปริมาณที่พอเพียงแม้กระทั่งผักผลไม้อย่างอื่นเราพยายามให้น้ำเนี่ยอยู่ในใช้ระบบของอิเล็กทรอนิกส์เข้ามาเดี๋ยวนี้มีการระบบควบคุมโดยการใช้ทางโทรศัพท์ในการปล่อยน้ำและการลดน้ำแต่ตัวนี้ก็ช่วยได้ทุกทีเนี่ยเวลาพอน้ำเยอะปั๊บเราใช้น้ำเยอะมากเกินไปในระบบชลประทานชาวนาก็จะปล่อยน้ำทิ้งใช่ไหมคะแต่พอมีการเทคโนโลยีในการปริมาณการวัดน้ำเนี่ยมันก็สามารถจะใช้น้ำแค่ความต้องการของพืชนั้นๆ
But it isn't just advancements in agri-technology that can provide solutions. By tapping the immense variety of rice, farmers can tailor their crops to the changing environment. In Indonesia, one company, Javara, is doing exactly this. Founder Helianti Hilman works with thousands of farmers across Indonesia to reintroduce legacy rice varieties to consumers.
Well, this is a collection of heritage rice of Indonesia, heirloom rice we call it, and these are selection of rice including cempo. Cempo can be cempo merah, can be or red rice, cempo hitam which is black rice. Actually, there are so many different varieties, not only in terms of the name, but also the diversity in terms of the color, in terms of the texture, in terms of the growing condition, in terms of the aroma. The last I have records, about 4 years ago, we still have about 1,200 varieties. But normally it's like within like small groups. And sometimes they even growing it in pots like the urban farming, you know, in containers, just for the sake of keeping alive the seeds, because they believe that probably one day if there is floods, they will need rice that are resilient towards, you know, water. Or if there is drought, they need rice that, you know, resilience towards the drought. So basically it's really about making sure that our variety are still kept alive so that whenever we need it, then we have it available. Or even in the coastal area, unfortunately during the tsunami in Aceh, it was like swept away. But we used to have rice that can grow on the sandy beach and taking, you know, high salinity.
While diversity in rice strains is important, there are calls now to diversify across the food supply chain as well. For Asia, this means reducing our dependence on rice as a staple.
Maka Badan Pangan pun sudah gencar menyampaikan bagaimana kita harus mendukung pemanfaatan pangan lokal sebagai pengganti beras. Sehingga ada slogan, kenyang tidak harus nasi. Orang bisa makan ubi kayu yang kalau memang dia sudah memang basicnya ubi kayu, jangan dipaksa dia makan beras. Orang bisa makan kalau di Irian Jaya dia bisa makan sagu misalkan, dia boleh memanfaatkan sagu.
We need to diversify first is accordingly to the environment, to the ecological. If you are in a arid land area like the eastern part of Indonesia like Sumba and things like that, then most natural you will go with sorghum or with corn, because this is something that they can grow easily even during a very harsh dry condition.
Even Thailand, the rice bowl of Asia, is looking into alternatives.
แล้วก็ทำน้อยได้มากเนี่ยระบบแบบนี้มาเริ่มเข้ามาแล้วสำหรับประเทศไทยนะคะแล้วก็ปรับเปลี่ยนโดยการที่ว่าจากการทำนา3 ครั้งก็เหลือ2 ครั้งก็เอาไปปลูกพืชตัวอื่นหรือทำนา2 ครั้งเนี่ยเดี๋ยวนี้คนก็เปลี่ยนมาเป็นทำนาครั้งเดียวแล้วก็ไปปลูกพืชอย่างอื่นคือถั่วเขียวประเทศไทยเรายังขาดแคลนอยู่นะคะแล้วก็ยังนำเข้าอยู่
Well, there are multiple crops and alternative that the government can explore. But the question that is, how do we pivot to a new crop? How do we plan ahead so that the farmer know what to grow, and is the market ready for a new crop?
But for the foreseeable future, rice will continue to be the most important staple for this region, providing 50% of Southeast Asia's calories. Addressing unpredictable yields and rising input costs will be crucial. Otherwise, we could lose one key cogwheel of our rice supply chain. the farmers themselves.
Ya soalnya kan kalau petani kan isu-isu pagi-pagi berangkat, udah itu ya belok apa kan kotor kan. Kalau zaman sekarang mah kan nggak mau gitu. Anak saya mah nggak ada yang dari petani, ada yang kerjanya kerja di ininya di material nyupir, minantu itu. Kalau anak saya kan perempuan semua. 3 jualan anak saya gitu. Yang satu di sana di Warung Mulia kerja di pabrik.
Global average age of farmers is around 60 years old. So if the agriculture sector's profit is going down, is becoming less and less profitable, then less and less younger generation would like to go into the agriculture sector.
Indonesia are losing 500,000 farmers every year. 30, 40 years down the road, I don't know whether the food sovereignty is there. Because food security, if you rely only for imports, what happens if there is a global catastrophe? When the countries decided to keep their own inventory of the staple food for their own food security, then we will be in problem.